Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the storm the Capitol kind. So if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, then this is a podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter and I'm your host. I'm a professor of theology and the lead pastor. Got my words mixed up there. The lead pastor of the Loft Faith community at West William Methodist Church in Los Angeles, California. If you like the show, please rate, review, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff on whatever podcast platform. We especially appreciate you subscribing to our YouTube channel and giving us Spotify comments. Seems like Apple is, I don't know what they're doing with their podcast platform. They're not as focused on it. So right now, most of our stuff is shifting to Spotify, and maybe that's the future. Who knows? But anyway, I am joined by the full crew. We're back. We're back and better than ever, as they say.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, the world's on fire, but yes, we're here and we're back.
Is something wrong?
Is something wrong? Something's going on?
Happen?
Blink, 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 blink,
blink,
blink,
blink.
I know. I'm like, oh God, no, it's crazy. How's everybody been?
Well, I've missed you.
Yeah, you've been
Jumbo.
abroad.
Yeah, Jumbo. I don't know what language is that? That's supposed to be Swahili.
That's Swahili.
Okay, yeah. So
that's 100% of my Swahili.
I was in South
and
Africa.
Hakuna Matata, you know that one.
I do know that one. Yep, and that is also Swahili. They do not speak Swahili. I mean, I don't think that's one of the official languages in South Africa.
I don't think it is
Zulu and the dialect that Trevor Noah's mom speaks, where it has all the clicks. Like hearing them say that, I kept wanting to try and say it, but I was like, I'm gonna say it wrong.
It's difficult.
It actually, you know what? The funny thing is, and this is so crazy because I'm already starting to weird conspiracy theories to begin the podcast. Here we go. All right, so the people who actually successfully could do some of the clicking sounds when it was demonstrated to us was all the black people. Every white person had a problem with it on the trip, and so I was like, is it difficult or is it something that we actually
genetic.
like? Yeah,
it's like white people trying to learn Chinese, right? Like we can't do many of us. I'm not gonna say all of us, but so many of us can't do the actual enunciations because our mouths are not designed for it.
And I think that some of it is like the mouth, like the muscle, like the tongue muscle and whatnot.
When I was on shortlist for Lion King in my other life, So when they put you on shortlist, they make you go through like a boot camp because the language is hard. And so you have to start to practice it just in case you get cast. And so it is interesting because it's it makes sense to
me. For the
circle
of life?
For the whole show.
That makes me cry.
Oh, God.
Because the circle of life is not nonsense. It's actually Kiswahili.
Yeah.
Zulu.
It's...
Right?
At any rate, I'm not sure exactly what language it is. I do love this song, but I had a great time. I was in a week in Joburg and a week in Cape Town, and one of my students...
What were you doing there?
So the course was an immersion course on connecting in racial justice and environmental justice that's been experienced in South Africa to what we're experiencing in America. It was really a deeply profound experience, and I don't know if I read the email that I sent to the church. So I wrote about it a little bit. Kosa, there you go. I can kind of say it it's still lingering in the back. Kosa. And the class was it was 9 students and it was pretty powerful. I think probably one of the key takeaways that I will continue to unpack on this podcast in the future, because there's 2 people I've met over there that I want to get on the podcast at some point, was just how pervasive colonial thinking is to all people, including and especially black people, and how you can have this internalized self-hatred that even if you occupy the positions of power, you still can do things that I would argue are racist to other black people as a black person, because of the way you've internalized a kind of self-hate. And it was pretty wild. And at the same time, there's so much beauty and so much joy there, and so much amazing music and amazing food and dancing. And I don't want to talk about it like it was just a bunch of suffering, because there wasn't. But I think connecting their suffering to what we are experiencing here was it was pretty easy. It was pretty easy to draw the through lines of colonialism and white supremacy. So yeah, and I'm glad.
How's the white genocide?
Yeah, so there were some whites. I did run into some whites while I was down there.
Genocided?
They were not. It's now Joburg. One of my students called Joburg Chocolate City because Joburg is like it's like blackety black. Like nice. Joburg. Oh, this other thing too. That's it. So I'm gonna send this to my friend Malefi because he's gonna think it's so funny. When Malefi was a historian, he was a part of the ANC, so that's African National Congress, the ruling party in South Africa, the party of Mandela that helped overthrow apartheid. He basically talked about like the emergence of racialized categories and things of that nature in his life, and so he kept using words like so-called colored and so-called black and so-called white, which I thought was so fascinating because he still remembers a time and it was just purely ethnic identity, like tribal identity, and he was like. And it just would make so much more sense in his mind. He was like, they're not white, they were Dutch, or they're Afrikaners, or, I am Kosa, Kosa. And like, so it was fascinating, I think, to hear them really nuance and have a different way of thinking about identity, particularly racialized identity. I even met this, so shout out to the people who run Seven Sisters Winery out there. And this last thing I'll say, we can talk about something else, but I thought this was the most fascinating thing. So like Wesley, in South Africa, if you were like indigenous South Africa, like if you were born there, you would be identified as a colored person is what they would call you because you're not quite black, but you're not quite white. So you're basically in the middle. But the way they set up their reparations program is to get reparations for certain things, you have to identify as black. And there's this one Indian woman there who totally identifies as black. Like she's the person who runs Seven Sisters Winery. And the reason she had this fascinating story about her father got fired, like illegally fired from a job. And so she understood from a child that her experience was the same experience as a black experience, that she wasn't going to fight. She wasn't going to punch down. She was like, she totally had like a black consciousness is what I would describe it. And I was like, it was amazing because she kept saying, I'm black and black this and black that. And I was looking at her like, is she talking about her? Is she like, but that was how she understood herself, and it was ridiculously cool. And I'll put a link to their winery in the show notes because they mostly sell their wine in Europe. They used to sell it in America, but they got some. I did learn about a lot of where the racism is happening there, but that's again, I could do a whole podcast on stuff I learned from there and how they are not trying to help their people of color, even the people of color that are in charge down there. But anyway,
that makes me think of Kamala's mom. Kamala?
Yes. Actually, she did actually mention that too. It was. I mean, because Africa and India are so close. That's the thing. Like, there's a lot of Indians in Africa, or what we would call Indians in Africa.
Some Indians are dark skinned. Like, there was an Indian girl I used to hang out with, and people would think we were sisters if my hair was straight. Yeah.
So, anywho. Amazing experience, really transformative. Looking forward to, it's weird. I would say looking forward to going back, but in some ways it was really difficult. I don't want to go back. In other ways I do because I miss people already. But a great trip nonetheless.
While you've been gone, it's not as if nothing has happened in this
Nothing's
country.
happened.
So
I don't know. It might be better
sailing.
there shortly.
Low bar. Very low bar.
Low bar. In certain places, it actually, I would say it is better there. Actually, having just left, I would tell you yes. Certain communities is definitely better there than it is
really
here.
great universities in South Africa. You
I
can
know.
teach in.
I know. They trust me. They already were talking to me. So I do want to. We have a couple. One email that I want to say something about, and then a listener response that we're actually get to when we talk about ICE. But we did get an email from a gentleman by the name of Nick. I'm not going to use his last name, which I wanted to shout out. So Nick is a self-identifying conservative. His email was titled "Conservative Enjoyer of the Progressive Christians Podcast," and his email was long, and we can't talk about it all. Although Nick, rest assured, it was a moment. It was a lot of discussion happening in the pre-show meeting about the email. What I appreciated about it was simply, as an ethicist, I know how important it is, or I think it's important to make sure you're wrestling with the strongest counter arguments to your own thinking. And it's not easy for many people to actually intentionally seek out people who would help them think differently about what they actually think spiritually and religiously. So I thought that was pretty cool. The thing I wanted us to discuss, or at least, spend a moment talking about the four of us, was Nick mentioned in some way or shape occasionally having a conservative guest on the podcast to talk about certain topics. I thought that if we could find the right guest, that could be something that I might be interested in doing. But I know y'all came at it from different perspectives, so I was curious about what y'all thought, and I want to start with Julia, because Julia is. Oh yeah, I do want to start with you because you had an interesting response.
I mean, I love white men. I want to. Everyone in.
I'll stop.
Everyone can attest to my.
Some white men. You love them.
I love them.
You care about them.
I date that, like, it's a sickness, a mental illness. But I think for me, I love engaging in conversations with people who have differing perspectives than my own, especially white men. I have found through the disillusion of many relationships that the problem is very rarely my desire to talk about things, and more often than not, their inability to listen to what I have to say. Like, I always find that there's often a disconnect between their own racism towards me, of like, they are incapable of like accepting my perspective. And that can be frustrating and painful for me, but I'm always willing to do it. Bring them on. Come on, Jamal. I don't, because I feel like I grew up like I know and understand that perspective, because for the majority of my life, I went to public school. The only books we read were written by white men. Yeah. The only movies that I watched were written and directed by white men. Like, I don't feel, and I'm not saying that I couldn't be wrong. I'm not saying I don't have blind spots. I'm not saying that, but I do think I have a decent understanding of that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's the perspective of dominant culture, right? And so it's like, do you have understanding of perspective of dominant culture? But Blair, I'm curious about what you thought.
I have lots of things to say, but the simple thing I'm going to say is I'm not sure that we need a conservative voice, because we're carrying it in our brains all the time. Like you said, that like colonial mindset. I don't need to know what a white man would say in a conversation, because I already know, because it's already been taught to me, because that is the basis of the education system that I was raised in. That is the basis of the media system that we engage with. Like, I already know. And so if you want to talk to, like, if you want to have a conversation between like moderate white men and conservative white men, like, please go right ahead. There are a ton of podcasts that are like that. I don't need to talk to white men more than I already do.
Wesley?
Yeah, we're all taking little
and I married
one.
I'm married to one. She's like, I have one in the house.
And you created one.
I'm raising one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I appreciate the perspective, and thank you for listening, Nick. One of the reasons we started this whole thing was because there just was a lack of progressive Christian voices in any space, especially ones that weren't. I mean, I know a handful of progressive podcasts, mostly white, and so our community strives to be one that is diverse, one that brings in perspectives from people who we often don't hear about, and so I could agree that conversation is always great, but I think in your email you mentioned that we share the same end goal of the flourishing of Christ's church and the furthering of the beloved community. And on paper, that yes, we do share that same goal, but it looks different for our community and the community we're trying to build. One that is queer affirming, one that is that it lets people be who they are fully in a space that surrounds them with love, doesn't stipulate how they need to act or engage with Christianity in order to be included, in order to be loved. And I have yet to see a conservative Christian community that does that isn't segregated, that tells me as a queer person, I mean, you can come in, but like there's limits to what you can do in our community. And so on paper, the words may be the same, but our end goal and how that looks is very different. And so it's difficult for me always to want to bring in perspectives that undermine or discourage people who aren't white from participating. Conservative Christianity discourages the type of diverse human experiences that each of us on this podcast engage with on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you guys did a great job encapsulating essentially. I think that the difficulties I think we have. I think, Nick, I want to be clear. I probably was the most sympathetic to your email, but that's probably not surprising based on anybody. You've been listening to the podcast long enough. You know who you're talking to. But I think more so because of, I think that I like engaging in like important dialogue about things that matter to me from people with different perspectives. But the fundamental challenge I think we find, that I've had a hard time finding outside of the academy, is people who are willing to engage in those conversations in ways that don't dehumanize me or dehumanize my community or people that I love. And I think that's the tricky part. I have thought of a few. I think they would identify as conservative, but quite honestly, on a scale, they would probably fit more as moderate people of faith, who actually would be interesting to talk about certain topics on the podcast on. So all I'll say is that it is something that I'm considering, but I do want to give you personally, for me, I take the time to read conservative media. I can't listen to it, and I think someone who has the willingness to do that, to try to stretch and learn from like the other side of the aisle argument, so to speak, I have nothing but respect for that. So thank you for listening, and hopefully you found us enlightening, and that we are helping challenge some of your assumptions, and I'm sure there's other things that you can challenge us on at some point as well. So at some point, I think I won't say I think, I am going to create a Discord community that I think could allow some of this to take place in a way that's like helpful and healthy dialogue. That's kind of like what I did when I taught my Christian ethics class, quite honestly, because that's actually what happened. And it was good. Like when the war in Ukraine broke out, that was like an excellent example of people who came at it from different perspectives, and were reaching different conclusions, even if they all felt that Ukraine shouldn't have been bombed. Right. So I think in my head, I've seen it happen. But honestly, I've Wesley, to your point, I've rarely seen it happen in church. I've seen it happen best in the classroom. And maybe that's like a sign of like just a fundamental weakness in the way the way we do church. I don't know. So whatever. Anyway, we don't have forever to talk about it, but I want to at least bring it up because I appreciated the email, and I wanted to.
We all appreciated the email. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for listening.
Nick, for listening. Absolutely.
So anyway, what are we going to talk about today? We will be discussing, I guess, this is how I'm defining Trump's bill, and it's super wordy, but just ride this with me. Tax cuts for the rich at the expense of healthcare for the poor, working and middle class, and making ICE a paramilitary act.
I mean, it's 900 pages, so I feel like that encapsulates a lot of it.
That's what Schumer got to do, right? It's not a bill, it's an act.
Oh, God. It's ridiculous. I know, Chuck. Anyway, go ahead and let it go, Chuck. Anywho, that's what it should be called, so that's what I'm going to call it.
Great.
Because I feel like we got to call it what it is rather than the BS that he's trying to describe it as.
You can't say that every time.
And well, I will in my head. I don't know if I'm saying it out loud every time. I kind of want to start with and we've already done a decent amount. I know, Blair, you did a rundown a few weeks ago of the some of the provisions in the bill that are especially frightening. But one of the things that I wanted to discuss, and it kind of came up in our chat while I was traveling, was the Medicaid cuts, right? Because to me, this is like just ridiculous, like the way in which this is going to be hurting all of us, quite honestly. And so I'll put this in the show notes, but there is a hospital that has already closed in Nebraska. It happens to be, this is like absolutely crazy, the hospital that one of my students' mother works at. So one of the students that was on my trip in South Africa, she works in Cook Nebraska at this hospital, and that's hospital that's closing, even though the bill, like, basically the hospital is closing because it's anticipated lack of funding. So it's like they're like, hey, we are already struggling. This bill is going to make it even harder. So we're just going to go ahead and close so we don't lose any more money. And this person's mother is like super MAGA, like, and so she was just talking about all that stuff and just wrestling with how she was going to share this stuff back with her community. I think that what really frustrates me in this is how this is going to hurt us all, because by having these Medicaid quote unquote work requirements, decreasing the amount of people, I think that they're expecting 6 million people to lose Medicaid and a bunch more people to lose SNAP benefits, which ultimately increases the wait times in emergency rooms and increases all of our healthcare, because hospitals have to treat people like they can't turn people away. So you come to the hospital, even though health insurance, you still got to get care. So then they pass that cost on to everybody else. We all will pay more money for health insurance, you crazy people. That's what I want to like shake them all and say.
Well, I think that's why it's so I didn't know what life was before the Affordable Care Act. I was a child. But when I hear stories of the broken health system that we all thought was normal, and to see the system that we're currently existing in, and we all sort of just like, this is a absolutely broken system, first and foremost because it puts it commoditizes health. Like, people's access to the things that they need to survive are now behind a paywall, so to speak. If you can afford it, you can continue living. If you can't, sorry. And that just seems like a fundamentally broken way of looking at humanity. And so Medicaid is incredible. It does a lot of great things, and it should be more accessible to people, not less accessible. And so it's just an absolutely wild reality that we're existing in.
But mark my words, this is going to be the thing that's going to get us universal health care. A whole lot of people are going to die and suffer. And down the line, they're going to look back and they're going to be like, well, and it's going to swing the other way. Mark my words. It's going to take some time. If any of us survive it, I might not. I might not live to see it. But, to those of you
for those in
that
the
have
future,
children, good luck.
We wish you the best.
We did it for you.
Self-sacrifice for the greater good. I mean, I think that's a really good point, actually. I could see it turning around like that, particularly if we come up with something like Medicaid or Medicare, I'm sorry, for everyone who wants it, which I think actually would be, that's what I would have been arguing for forever, but that's more akin to a lot of other countries who have public insurance plus you can get a private like a private
supplemental
insurance. Supplemental
which
insurance,
people are doing anyway, right? Like, so here, I mean, before this, people with great insurance were still paying for concierge because our healthcare system is so abysmal. And just the idea of like, we're short on doctors because medical school is so expensive. Like,
and we're short on doctors because of our immigration too. Like, I met 2 doctors in South Africa who decided to not come here, who are immigrating to Europe because they're afraid of coming here and getting deported.
The brain drain is real.
Also just canceled the ability for people to pay for medical school, because that's part of this bill too, is limiting loans. And so by the time you get through undergrad and med school loans, you're easily exceeding the caps that they've put. And those doctors can pay those off. They make enough money, they can pay them off. But if they can't access them, then they don't become doctors. I'll give a shout out. If you don't know about the rural medical system program, I don't even know if it's still going to exist now, but there is a program from the federal government that if doctors who graduate agree to serve 3 years in a rural community, they will pay off their student loans. It's kind of like Teacher America kind of thing. And there's a new movie. It's a short documentary called Doc Albany, which is about this project. And my husband's company helped make it. It's really beautiful. So you should keep an eye out for that. Doc Albany explains the system. But they're cutting money. They're cutting money to programs that actually end up getting more money back to the federal government, right? Like money we spend on Medicaid, actually every dollar spent gets like $1.8 back in tax revenue and costs saved. And they're cutting those things and then just creating more and more incentive for rich people to be rich and hoard their money. And it's not good for anybody except those like 1,000 rich people at the very top of the pyramid.
This administration doesn't care about poor people. Like, it fundamentally wants to make it worse for poor people. And so it's not about health. It's just about, oh, you're poor? Sorry. Life has to be more difficult for you.
It's also not sustainable. But I think the way that they justify it for me is like, I genuinely and sincerely believe is evil and like demonic. And these are dark forces. This is the darkness. This is, if every film you've seen, the super villain, like this is it, the way that they are justifying it.
So Julia, to your point about how they're justifying it, one of the things that you sent us a Substack article by Jonathan Larson, who is an atheist as far as I could tell, but did a really good job of like explaining, actually even enlightening me, because I had not even heard of this, a conservative Christian group who kind of runs a lot of the Bible studies on Capitol. It's called Capitol Ministries, or on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. It's called Capitol Ministries, and it's run by this conservative, politically and religiously conservative gentleman by the name of Ralph Drollinger. That's probably how you pronounce the name. So he teaches like his biblical views on like the way in which the Bible should shape political policy in state capitals around the country and in Washington, D.C. So, for instance, his June Bible class, which came right after Israel began attacking Iran, included teaching that the Jews killed Jesus, which, as we know, is a longtime Christian or a longtime anti-Semitic trope used by evangelical Christians that's disavowed by mainline Christians. But this is where you get the strange intersection of this anti-Semitism that supports Israel because they actually want to see the destruction of Israel for bringing Jesus back, which unfortunately a lot of like conservative Jews haven't figured out, even though we've been trying to tell them like that's actually, it's anti-Semitic actually. Like, you know, they want to support you so you die, right? Like that's actually anti-Semitic, but maybe you don't.
Supporting them so that we all die.
Oh, well, that's fair. That's fair, Wesley. That's more accurate. That's more accurate. That's more accurate. Thank you for that helpful clarification. But anyway, so he has this Jonathan Larson did a really good, and we'll obviously put the Substack in the show notes, did a really good job of kind of critiquing this Bible study. But there's just a couple of things we wanted to lift up. Actually, you know what? I'll link it. It's pretty. You can read it and see how ignorant it is. The session they did the week before, so the week right before they passed the bill, was titled "God's Design for a Social Safety Net." It basically made the case that because the New Testament never talks about governments helping people, that helping the truly needy is like not what the church or not what the government should do. It's what churches should do. And you see that in the early church community. But even then, within an early church community, there are limitations to that because it should start with individuals and then families and then the church, because they're doing that same kind of teaching that J.D. Vance was doing, that the Pope basically said, that's ridiculous. And then the Pope died because he was so frustrated with J.D. Vance. Maybe. I don't know if that's why the Pope died, but it could be. So anyway, I'm just saying, he was like, you know what? I'm tired of arguing with y'all people. Deuces, I'm out. Like, he's just like,
I'm just saying, it was like 12 hours after he met JD Vance. So
I don't know. He was just like, you know what? I'm taking a stairway to heaven. Y'all drive me crazy. But basically, Drollinger's primary argument is that, again, that the government shouldn't help people because when the Bible was written, the government during the time of the writing of the Bible didn't help people. So that's his argument. I'm curious of your thoughts. I can't even ask the question without laughing because it's the supposition is ignorant.
Well, they're failing to exegete, right? This is eisegesis. They're saying, oh, well, because it says these words, I am going to read them literally. And it is in there to say, like, you know, you should work if you can. You should take care of your own children and make sure they're fed. Like, those are things that are in the Bible. But Paul's writing to like very specific communities. He's got like a guy in mind who has decided because he's part of the Christian community and they feed everybody, he doesn't have to work anymore. Like, he's talking about a specific person. He's not talking about like the generic reality of the difficulty of work in a capitalist society. Like, or he's definitely not talking about disabled people. He's definitely not talking about, you know, moms who have to stay at home because they can't afford childcare. Like, the idea that these specific verses can be extrapolated out and apply to everyone in this particular context is just a failure to understand the context in which the text was written. It's just sloppy. It's just sloppy Bible study. And they're using it to further their agenda so that they don't have to care about other people and they can keep all their own money in their own house and try to feel like they're not failing the beloved community.
And like, they're not terrible Christians. Like, they're not failing at the faith that they claim to. Also, to me, it was not lost on me that there's this huge focus on like how specifically to care for women, like who deserves care if they like are impoverished. It's like the order of like, if it's a widow, she has to be of a certain age that she can't remarry and she has to have had a certain amount of kids. If she didn't do that, then I guess she should die. Like, I don't, but the thing is, for me, at least they're consistent because the end is they actually just want, it seems like, everyone to die. Is this?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. They don't, Wesley, I'll let you go, but just to answer Julia's question, because it kind of gets to the comment that the one Republican official from Iowa, she said, I think in her,
We're all going to die.
Yes.
Yeah, we're all going to die. But the problem with that is like literally, and this is where I feel like if they actually did take the Bible literally, where you're looking at the commandment that says thou shalt not kill, we are not supposed to actually expedite when the death of people, right? That actually is against like the moral teaching of our faith tradition, right? And so saying it is a fact of nature that we all will die, but we should not create systems that cause inhumane suffering and expedite the process of death. Like, that is fundamentally and morally wrong. But Wesley, I'm just
I was having a hard time remembering what this article was talking about, because I remember opening up, starting to read it, and then wanting to jump off a bridge, because it felt so evil and consistent with how, in the same way that like conservative Christians will cherry pick the Bible to make it so that queer people end up in hell. It was like, oh, well, here are all these texts in the Old and New Testament to say that we shouldn't help poor people. And if that's your religion, if that's your Christianity, I don't understand you. It lacks humanity, period. And so it's just like, okay, well, I guess you could cherry pick and make it so that poor people don't exist in your mind, but I don't want to live in that world. I like caring about my neighbors. I want to help people. They don't. And just so we're just like diametrically opposed in how we engage with other people. And it's frustrating because it is under the guise of Christianity. It's furthering this, like, here's the system that is just so broken and continues to be like reified through bad actors.
Wesley, I hope those aren't the military coming for you.
So no, this is just downtown Los Angeles. This is my daily life. I
know,
notice it when I'm on here, and I'm just like, oh, but other times it's whatever. It's like whatever. It's the noise of the city.
Yeah. No, I think that, a couple quick things. This is one of the things that continues to frustrate me, is not just that it's using the Bible and doing eisegesis, to your point, Blair. Not just that it's like deeply inhumane and doesn't represent the beloved community. It's that it's inconsistent to how they actually use scripture. I think part of the reason I actually got a PhD in religion is because how much I'm annoyed by inconsistent reasoning. Like, I actually think like that's at the fundamental core of it, is when you make an inconsistent argument with me, I want to like use my skills to tear your argument to shreds and make you feel bad, which is definitely a flaw. I'm not going to say that's a character strength. That is a character flaw. Because
seeking truth is a character flaw?
Well, the way I do it, I will tell you, my students will say, yeah, I've crossed the line. There's boundaries one should have when you do it. I have sometimes crossed the boundary. I'm like, ooh, that was too harsh.
Well, it's not. Reading that article is they've crossed a line.
Yeah.
In like creating this class of people that they're saying the Bible doesn't says we don't care about. We shouldn't care about you. Like, what an insane reality to live under.
Yeah.
Well, that's like the thing, right? Is like they've created and they uphold and they genuinely believe in this like extractive capitalistic structure, but then that needs poor people. You can't have like the whole like we have the resources so that we could eliminate like there are many nations in the world that just don't have poverty, like it doesn't exist, and we are, I say this all the time, the wealthiest nation that has ever existed in human history. So there's not a reason that we have as much poverty as we do, other than the fear of it is what keeps people motivated to stay engaged in the system. Okay, but then you also disdain those people and you would gladly let them starve to death? Like
it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Also, it assumes that people who are receiving SNAP benefits and Medicaid aren't working. Yeah. Many of them are,
well, right?
Like the majority of people who receive SNAP and Medicaid are children or disabled or elderly. Like that, if so even this line in this, if anyone is not willing to work, then he is not to eat either. It's not about willingness. And then there are a lot of people who are on SNAP and Medicaid because they've been pounding the pavement looking for a job that's above federal minimum wage and they can't find one. I think perhaps the most frustrating thing about this whole thing, there's a lot that's frustrating, but at the very top of it, there's a letter from the author, Ralph Drollinger, and it says, one of the most volatile policy issues of our time relates to a fundamental disagreement regarding how a nation should approach entitlements. Entitlement programs now devour the majority of the U.S. federal government's budget, and as of 2024, the national debt reached $36 trillion and is growing rapidly at an uncontrollable rate. We did a podcast on where the majority of entitlements go. We have looked at this. We have analyzed this. Thank you, Matthew Desmond, for putting this together. The majority of entitlements go to rich people who don't work.
Tell them,
not to poor people who are desperately trying to work and unable to feed their families working 80 hours a week. So the whole premise of this is based on a misunderstanding and an obfuscation, an intentional obfuscation of where our governmental entitlements already go. And so they're saying we have to make these changes because we have to reduce the debt for the country. But in reality, we're actually increasing the debt to the country using this bill. And we are not investing in things that actually end up bringing bigger tax returns to the federal government, which includes paying for Medicaid, paying for SNAP, paying for early childhood education, paying for childcare. Those things have been proven to bring in more tax revenue. Instead, we're giving entitlements to the rich, we're taking entitlements from the poor, and we are actually draining the federal government's budget by paying for things we don't need.
I think one of the reasons I think we don't, or I think people are unaware of often what Medicaid is because it's called something different in different states. Like every state has a different version of it. So I think that's one challenge that we have. Also, I think for some reason, people don't understand that Medicaid, they're like, oh, it's an entitlement program where I think people think you get a Medicaid check rather than recognizing Medicaid is insurance and you don't get a check and you only get it if you're working. And so this is a work reporting requirement. So basically you're already working. You have to now fill out this paperwork to prove that you're working, that you have to have your employer signed, this other kind of stuff. It's all this paperwork that they already tried. They tried a version of this in Arkansas. And it actually ended up they spent more money creating the infrastructure to record the reporting than they actually thought they were going to save by having this program. And it turned out there was no fraud. They found no fraud. And more people died. So it did everything to actually cause fiscal harm, actual harm, structural harm. And so, but to Julia's point, it's about talking points. And I think that it fits in that way. Real quick, I want to say this, and then I want to toss it over to Blair to kind of finish your point, because I know I cut you off, Blair. I think this is where I think their misinterpretation of the Bible is so gross, is because the Bible actually is very clear from the very beginning through the end that it actually is a liberatory document. It says, first right off the bat, it democratizes the fact that everybody's created in the image of God. We don't understand how radical of a concept that is. When you come from a time when you have pharaohs and kings and queens who said, I am God. That's basically what the writers of the Bible are saying. Actually, no, you're not God. That's why it's listed in 10 Commandments. Like, this is on my mind partly because it's going to be my sermon series for the next several weeks. But that's what always frustrates me. And I'm like, it's pretty straightforward right from the beginning. But then after that, because of that, the 10 Commandments in Leviticus is actually about how a community is supposed to take care of each other. And also how a community is supposed to take care of foreigners, which we're going to talk about in a second with respect to the funding of ICE. Like, it's actually very generous with requirements of how you're supposed to support each other in community. Then you fast forward to the New Testament community, the early church, obviously, as we know, Acts 2 really supported each other, kept growing, right? That's what we see all throughout Acts. But they were not the government, right? You can't say the government didn't help people in the Bible, so therefore should help people now, when it was a tiny emerging Jewish sect, right? Like that, that is the height of not even just a moral inconsistency. It's like an ad hominem, or it's basically trying to justify an argument by creating a scenario that actually can't possibly have existed. And so that for me is the frustrating part, where I think you can look at the words Jesus actually says about like caring for the poor, about loving your neighbor, about supporting the widow and the orphan, about, I don't know, providing radically free healthcare, as Jesus seemed to be doing all throughout his ministries. I don't know, healing up folks, maybe doing some of that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, Jesus was just like Blue Cross Blue Shield up in there, just snapping up folks, healing them up, you know?
And not charging them for it.
and doing it for free. Exactly.
For free. He's saying, keep it a secret. Don't tell anybody. But even the argument that the Roman government didn't have entitlement programs, they did.
They did.
Annonay was a grain redistribution program to make sure people didn't starve, and the Alimenta was a welfare program for impoverished children to make sure that impoverished children didn't starve.
And they had the Jubilee every 7 years.
And the Jubilee oh my gosh. The time I explained the Jubilee to a conservative Christian in the conversation around student debt was mind-blowing.
Yeah, I know.
They were so confused. I was like, no, the Jubilee is every 7 years we release all the debts when we don't hold on to them anymore, and everybody gets their land back, even if you sold it. And she had literally never heard of this. And she's like, well, if people take out money to go to school, then they should pay it back. I said, okay, but after 7 years, it should be forgiven because that's what the Bible says.
Yeah, that's what people say. I love the Bible. I'm like, do you though? You
haven't even read the Bible.
Or do you just love the parts you want to read? And I'm not saying, like, we all cherry pick the Bible. That's the truth. We all cherry pick. We all pay more attention to certain parts and struggle with others. But the difference, right? And I use these terms, exegesis versus eisegesis. Exegesis is examining the text in its context, understanding the history, understanding the genre, understanding who the author is, who the audience is, and then trying to extrapolate what it means and might then mean for us today. Eisegesis is saying, I don't want to care about poor people, so can I find a way to make the Bible support that? It's taking your own ideas and putting them into the text. And it's not to say we don't sometimes turn to the text and say, hey, I know this about faith and I need to go search the text and find where it is. But that when we do that, that's searching for things we know to be true from being raised in divine community. Eisegesis is saying, this is maybe in... this thing makes me uncomfortable, or this is a thing we disagree about. And so I'm going to go find evidence to support my argument so that I can keep living the way I want to live. Yeah, and that's what this whole Bible study is.
Yeah, that's like, I think even if people say, I don't like poor people, I think often people start with, it's their fault they're poor and I should have to take care of them. I think there are some people who totally don't like poor people and don't care. I think there's a good amount of people who, because they bought into the lies of extractive capitalism, they believe poor people are poor because they are lazy and they've done something to deserve their poverty. And they don't understand.
It's not even that they hate poor people. It's that they don't want to have to not be rich. Because the thing is, it's less that they hate poor people, because I've met a lot of rich people who give a lot of money to charity, who will go out of their way to build relationships with poor people. They're one-sided extractive relationships, and they don't understand that, but they think that they're doing good things, and they do participate in charity a lot. What they don't want to do is grapple with the extravagance that they live in.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so they have to find a way to defend that it's okay that they live in massive extravagance while some people can't feed their kids. and that is actually a systemic issue, not that they deserve to live in extravagance and those other people deserve to live in destitution.
Yeah, I think you're right, that kind of self-examination is the essence of what it means to actually follow the spiritual path of Jesus. Like that's so much of what Jesus is talking about. When Jesus says, "He that has it, let them that have an eye see, let them with the ear hear," which is kind of ableist in the translation or whatever. The point is, it's about internal examination, right? It's about, do you have the willingness and capacity to examine yourself, to say, am I following this way of radical compassion that I see helps us understand that we are all interconnected? Like we are all one. Like that's it. Like full stop. We are one. What you do to another, you do to yourself. And every time you try to create wall or barrier or some kind of way of thinking to justify harm, all you're doing is trying to create some space between yourself and the person that's going to cause suffering so you don't have to feel it. Julia?
There's also, I think, this weird belief. I don't know where it comes. I mean, yes, I do. I'm lying. It comes from Ronald Reagan. And it's this belief that there is some giant portion of the population who is just sitting around at the house watching Maury. What do people watch during the day now?
They're watching Days of Our Lives and Maury, and they're just cashing their welfare checks, and they're popping out more babies so they can get more money. That person does not exist.
It has never existed. It was a lie when it was told to the people. And when you look at nations that have robust and successful, flourishing social safety nets, you can see that the percentage of people that take advantage of that is so minor that the majority of the population doesn't even care. I know so many people who are like, well, I know several people from other countries who would say things such as, in the Netherlands, I think it's like less than 3% of the population that is just taking advantage.
Yeah, it's even less than that. Like 3% is generous.
And they would say, like, I don't care. I would rather the 3% do whatever they're doing and I don't have crime. And we don't have poverty and we don't have crime. I don't care that this negligible amount of people is taking advantage. That's totally fine. Okay. All right. And the idea that you're ever going to there will never be, it's not possible to have 100% of human beings in the workforce. It's not possible. People have disabilities. People have, it's not possible. So to think that that's a thing we should even be striving for is not acknowledging the fact that, I mean, it's ableist. It's
it's not acknowledging human difference. Now, there's two things I want to get to before we wrap up, just to make sure we at least touch on them. And one of them is the amount of funding that's in this bill that goes towards ICE.
Boo! Sorry.
Which is
you don't need to apologize for that. Boo ICE.
Yeah, boo ICE. I think people, first of all, act like ICE didn't come into existence in our lifetime. Like ICE started in 2000 after September 11th, right? It's a very recent agency. The current funding structure that passed makes it so that ICE, it would be considered the 16th highest budget for a military in the world, right? So basically ICE, if it was a military unto itself, its annual budget would make it the 16th highest or most spending military in the world, right? And so
over entire nations?
Over entire nations. Yes. Over entire nations.
Our notes here, Dr. Carter, that the Italian military budget in totality for the entire nation of Italy is 30.8 billion.
Yeah.
And they're expanding
and ours
to 37.5 billion.
Exactly. Yeah.
So almost as much as is spent by the entire nation of Italy on all of its military force.
Budgets are a moral document.
Yeah. And so that is insane, right? And so the what really got to me, so I was preparing for this, one person listens to our podcast pretty consistently, Vov Pixiful, wrote, I'm wondering more and more about these ICE agents. Something is really wrong within them. They are human, like Wesley and Everest. My brain can't really process how they can do this and still live like this isn't wrong. And this was the episode we did on the ICE raids and the LA protests. I agree. I think that there is something within them that's fundamentally, they have given in to that a brokenness that has allowed them to fail to love, and they're trying to reinterpret their love of country in ways that's actually deeply fascist because it requires them to dehumanize others in their mind. But in fact, this bill did, not only in funding ICE and funding all these detention centers and funding all this border patrol expansion and enabling local law enforcement to now be financially incentivized to cooperate with ICE. It basically not only does it do that, which is obviously terrible, it also actually punishes people here who are citizens, but their parents are undocumented. So it makes it so they can't get some of the anti-poverty benefits from the child tax credits. It makes it so that they have a harder time accessing health insurance and nutritional aid through SNAP. And so it's like it's like evil. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't want to feed kids that are citizens. I don't know why you would want to, like, other than you're just like, hey, it'll stop immigration. And at its core, this is what I want to say, and I'm gonna say this now, and then I know we gotta move on, but this is where I think like the primary win of Zoran Mamdani in New York, and these things right here that are passing, you see their true colors are about racism. Like, they don't want brown people. That's fundamentally what it is. They believe in eugenics. At their core, they believe in eugenics. And having gone to South Africa, now I see what happens when they actually are very explicit about it. Whereas here it's more implicit, but it is eugenics. And they're trying to sell that. And they are saying the quiet part out loud, and we need to believe them. Julia?
They're selling it. People are buying it. People are picking up what they are putting down. Last night, I had the pleasure of seeing Parade, which is a musical. It's about the Leo Frank case in Georgia in the early 1900s, a Jewish man from Brooklyn who was accused and tried for killing a young white Christian girl. And he was sentenced to death, and then he appealed it, and then so he was taken off of death row, and then people went into the jail and kidnapped him and lynched him. Sorry, spoiler alert. It's a real upper. It's not. But this production is really, really beautiful, and they used newspaper clippings they used a bunch of images from historical images. And I wish that it had a trigger warning, because after the lynching, they used the actual photos from his lynching, like the actual, because people forget that was like a thing that people used to do when they would lynch people. They would take pictures and they would like throw a party. And so they had those pictures, and they were zooming in on the faces. And so when you talk about this kind of like malevolent evil, this hatred, we don't see it as clearly. We're starting to see it. We didn't see it growing up. The type of hate, visceral, animalistic, monstrous hate that creates this violence in people, that they enjoy doing this to people that are not white. There's like, that is a thing that for the majority of our nation's history was at the forefront, that for a blessed, 30 years was kind of kicked to the back, that now is up front again. And so when it's like, I don't understand these ICE agents, man, when I like those images, I was like, there they are.
Yeah. I mean, I think, quite honestly, and I need to do some more. I'm going to say this because I'm not making an argument around it. It's more of a statement of what my perception is, that what Trump is doing, or what they're doing with ICE, is to make this kind of paramilitary feels very much like the Gestapo. It feels very much like you have a agency that you can control that can operate outside the bounds of law. And that's scary. That's dangerous. And again, this is not biblical. You're not going to find support you're going to find many more statements, verses, theologies in the Bible that are pro-immigration and pro-immigrant than you're going to find anti. And so this is much more about nationalism, about racism. It's about a particular kind of ideology that supports control. It's a mindset of scarcity that is being used and weaponized for the benefit of extractivist capitalism that benefits billionaires at the expense of everybody else. That's all this is. And so we need to be really clear that this is not Christian. There's nothing Christian about this. And so that's the part that is scary, you know? I want to wrap up by, because we've talked a few times about conservative, like how these conservatives, like political conservatives, elected officials, use the Bible to justify harm. With the exception, I mean, there's one outspoken Texas progressive white dude, progressive. That's who we should get on. We should get that white dude on. We can get that white guy on. Like that guy too. I'm like, you know what? We get that guy, man. Like, you know, who like actually uses the Bible in the ways in which not only I would say is in agreement with me, but I think what the Bible says. I even think that I put in the showdown or in the rundown for the show. Like, I think a more accurate title, for, at least for me, for like how I understand what I was envisioning when I wanted to create this podcast, is like the radically orthodox, like followers of Jesus podcast. But I was like, no one's gonna know what the heck that is, because I don't know that progressive isn't exactly what I want necessarily, because I don't agree with what progressives say all the time. I definitely don't agree with conservatives say all the time. I want to follow the religion of Jesus, but no one's gonna know what the heck I'm talking about if I say radically orthodox follower of Jesus, follow spiritual path of compassion podcast. That just doesn't quite.
Doesn't ring.
It's too many words too. So.
I know it's too many words. But anyway, so the question I want to end with is, do you think we could have a progressive Christian Bible study on Capitol Hill? Like, do you think that's something that should be created to give? Because what we find is that, you know, in this document that we're gonna put in the show notes, you'll see the number of people that sign it. The number you'll see in the Substack, the number of House representatives and senators that actually quote from it to make their arguments. Like, they're learning from it. This guy is teaching them and giving them the theological justification they need to do this moral harm, right? And so, would a progressive Bible study be helpful? Should we even have something like that? Like, I don't know. I just wanted to kind of toss out there and see what y'all think. Blair?
Well, there's an answer that there is. So first, Black Christian legislators have been using the Bible, right, in their speeches and stuff throughout all of this and for a very long time. Raphael Warnock gave a really phenomenal speech, if you haven't seen it, pushing back against this bill. But also, the only building on Capitol Hill not owned by the U.S. government is the United Methodist Church building. It is operated.
Which we've stayed at, Julie and I.
We have.
It is operated by the General Board of Church and Society, which is a United Methodist organization that exists to represent the not progressive, but just like you said, deeply orthodox Christian perspective of compassion.
Jesus teaching. Represent Jesus teaching.
In the governmental system. Also, the building that is right across from the United Nations is owned by United Methodist Women, formerly now known as United Women in Faith, which is also a space of organizing for ecumenical Christian and interreligious bodies. So there is a presence. The difference is those Bible studies aren't advertised. You're invited, and anyone is welcome. But the point of them is to actually nurture people's spirituality and like help them to stay grounded, following the path of compassion as they go about their work in government. The point is not to have like a big hoopla to do prayer around the pole, prayer on the floor. Like, it's not performative Christianity. And so I know some of the people who work in those buildings, and they are in deep discipling relationships with people who are decision makers. But it's not about who knows that. It's about strengthening those folks so that they can do the hard thing when the moment comes.
That's such a great point, Blair. And I knew that we had those spaces, those two Methodist buildings in those places. And I think you're right. Bible study at its best, it shouldn't be about trying to persuade like people to vote for certain or not vote for certain bills, right? Like, that's not what it's about. We just did, and I actually I listened to our episode on spiritual formation a few times, because there's a couple of things you pointed out, Blair, that I hadn't heard of on Stages of Faith that I think really described what it means to do that kind of internal self critique that we were talking about earlier. So maybe, I guess what I'm thinking of is, should there be like, you know, what to what extent should the Methodist Church or other more progressive mainline churches like send these conservatives like actual like theological arguments against what they're saying, right? So in my head, like the counter arguments, like the theological counter arguments to the BS this guy is preaching, because that's all they're hearing is this. So that way, it's not like I'm not sending you a Bible study. I'm sending you the actual what the Bible says. So
like in response,
like actively refuting the
literally like I
studies.
feel like if someone paid me, they say, hey, I'm gonna give you this amount of money, and what I want you to do is when every time this guy writes something, I want you to go through and do the counter argument to each one of these. Man, you know, if I could be a sabbatical free, I would do that because it's not hard
for free.
Oh, I need it.
You shouldn't do it for free.
My wife, you shouldn't, but you would enjoy it.
I would enjoy it. I would do it for free. My wife would be very upset if I did it for free. I can tell you that. Because I just feel like it's so easy to refute this and actually to make it more persuasive to say, like, actually, this is the right thing to do. This is the Christian thing to do. This is the Jesus-centered thing to do, is to show compassion, to love our neighbors, and to not vote for things like this. Unfortunately, I think I also wonder to what extent that people are using their faith as a cover to do something they want to do for their own selfish ambition.
And that's what I was going to say, because if you're taking the texts that this author, whatever his name was, Drollinger, it's you're so removed from like a sense of community oriented Christianity that I don't know if you sending points refuting what he's saying would even, because it's not about that. It's a cover, it's a foil for them to do the capitalist greedy thing that they want to do, and they just want to couch it as a way of like deflecting bad takes from coming to them by saying, well, it's Christian and here's how it's Christian. Like, should there be a progressive Christian Bible study? Maybe. I don't think any of our representatives are bold enough to do anything right now. We keep seeing it over and over again. So, like, what would that help? We need actual people who are willing to stand up. And I don't see that right now. The way that they're not endorsing Zoran Mamdani right now, but really sort of pushing it away when we're seeing the power that he's bringing to the people, is like, would it be helpful? Maybe, if we had actual leadership in the House and Senate. We don't right now.
I mean, the Democrats are not going to save us. I do think that I understand that many people who are what we have been saying, Orthodox, true followers of Christ's message, you don't believe, and also I think true patriots do believe in the separation of church and state, and don't believe in, you know, like the espousing of their religion for political gain or whatever. I do think, you know, I always admire Jimmy Carter, any person who is in public office who is led by their faith, but they don't need to talk about it. But I think that not talking about it, and I think that that's why we're in this position. This is what I've been saying the whole time, is like they get to go out and they get to use their terrible theology and they get to say whatever they want, and no one says anything on the other side. No one ever offers a rebuttal. So now everyone's like, well, I guess Christians are monsters. Like, here we are. So it's probably bad, but I think the time for like what the right thing is different now. Like, doing the right thing just is not the same as what it was 25 years ago, 50 years ago.
Yeah, it requires a more radical response to Wesley's point. And I think, you know, Wes, even though we mentioned Raphael Warnock, Blair, and you're right, you know, there has been elected, particularly Black officials who have used, I mean, Barack Obama, I think, was classic because of his affiliation with Jeremiah Wright. Like, he would use scripture and very profoundly, and actually, and Biden would do it too in the first go around when he was the vice president, and then his brain just kind of, you know, whatever. But he would use scripture and theology in ways I thought was actually exegesis, right? That would push them, because I remember Obama had this speech where he talked about the importance of negotiating for the nuclear agreement that he had with Iran, and talking about and using the Bible to justify this notion of peace. And this is what frustrates me about Raphael Warnock, and why I thought about Iran is because of some of his positions on Israel are clearly antithetical to the gospel. And I think that is what is frustrating, is the amount of money in politics, the influence AIPAC has, and how it has enabled and allowed a genocide to take place under our watch, and how we have conflated, you know, critique of Israel with anti-Semitism in ways that I just find deeply troubling. And I just listened to an amazing lecture, and I've been reading some books by Robin D.G. Kelly that has given me the intellectual foundations that I need. And Robin Kelly is a professor at UCLA, I should say, a history professor. Give me the intellectual tools I need to make a stronger argument of something I always felt is that part of the reason Black folks have had trouble with the fascism, anti-Semitism arguments that come out of our country, particularly those directed towards Israel, is because the way we define fascism should be, and genocide should have been applied to the enslavement and Jim Crow South to Black people. Like that's, and he tied it together for me in a way that I've always been in my head that I haven't been able to fully articulate. And then I read something he wrote and I listened to a lecture and I was like, there it is. I got it. And once I actually can articulate it for my own self, I will share it. But it encapsulates what I know to be true from the Black experience in this country, that they will use these words when it applies to people who look white. And they will not use these words when it applies to others. I just saw it in South Africa. I met a Namibian who y'all probably didn't even heard about the genocide in Namibia that I had to hear about when I was down there. And just because it's a genocide predisposition or dedicated around a kind of fascism, a kind of white Christian nationalist fascist thinking. Right. That's the same thing that justified the enslavement of Black folks, the elimination of indigenous people, and the perpetuation of Jim and Jane Crow in America. Like that's what this is. And so that's why I think people that's what it so when I say like a progressive study or something, it is something that pushes back at what we even have right now. Because we need courage, as you said, Wesley. We just need courage. And I think so many of people our generation, we know it. We just need a chance to be able to lead. Which means, unfortunately, we gotta get some of these old people to die. Anyway, on that note,
they don't have to die.
That's true. That's true. They don't have to,
but they could probably
retire, but they need to retire. So on that note, I want to thank you for joining us for the Progressive Christians podcast. The Progressive Christian podcast is a ministry of the Loft, a worship community of Westwood United Methodist Church. If you'd like to connect with us and be a part of our conversation, you can find us on all social media platforms at The Progressive Christians. I know we have been a little light on the social media activity. It's because my June was absolutely crazy. I will be back on the social media stuff probably starting tomorrow because I'm still a little jet lagged. So I want to get on there today because I might see something out of pocket. So by the time you get to this on Friday, July 11th, I should be back on there in the social media streets. So please connect with us. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Thank you for those of you continue to do that, subscribing and liking. That is making a difference. Our numbers are great, quite honestly, and I'm really excited for our show growth. I want to also give a shout out to AJ, our wonderful audio engineer, who is always doing miracles and making us sound great. So thank you all, and we will see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.